It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey joins us today on assignment in Kiev. Chris, if you're covering the World Cup, you're one country over from where you should be.
I'm not covering the World Cup, but I was definitely watching it earlier today.
All right, we'll ask you about it in a minute. Also joining us is Elena Gabrielon, journalist at sister station Radio France International in the Russian language service.
Good evening.
Nice to see you. Annette Lévy-Villard, senior correspondent at French daily newspaper Libération. Her latest book in French, I guess you could translate it as Chronicle of a Shockwave.
Yes.
And it's about the Me Too movement.
Me Too shook the world.
Me Too shook the world. Also with us, Stefan Siemens, correspondent for Spiegel Online. Thank you for being with us.
Guten Abend.
Guten Abend indeed. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Annette Lévy-Villard. The images are coming through now of people celebrating on Paris's Champs-Élysées after France's 2-0 win over Uruguay.
It's not over yet. They should wait a little bit. But they were good. I watched the game and they were good.
What is it? What do those images remind you of?
Of the last victory. But
the victory of 1998.
Yes, but it's different. The atmosphere is different. It's not as crazy as it was, you know.
Well, it's only the quarterfinals.
But it's too early. We have to wait until next week.
Hey, we've just gotten the first statement out of the French presidential palace, and Elena Gabrielon, French President Emmanuel Macron says he's going to go to Russia for the semis in St. Petersburg.
He announced it during this meeting in St. Petersburg, and seeing these images, I started to imagine the meeting of Macron with Vladimir Putin, and even maybe the game Russia against France in the final.
Do you think there'll be a meeting between Macron and Putin?
Possible. Oh, the meeting. I think that yes, and
because if there is, that would be before Donald Trump goes to Helsinki to meet Putin.
It could be a really very.
There could be a meeting.
Well, then soccer would really have some useful application to politics, because they might, try to soften the edges between the long-standing controversy between the U.S. and Russia.
Christopher Dickey, your thoughts on Emmanuel Macron traveling to St. Petersburg for the semifinals?
Well, I think from a domestic political point of view, he could hardly avoid it. And it's a good idea. I mean, Macron, on the 25th of May, I think it was, when he was in St. Petersburg before, he said he would go to the semifinals if France made it. And now France is going to make it. But on the 25th of May, at that conference, he was also very soft on Putin, much softer than he had been when he initially received Putin at Versailles early in his administration. So I think there's a sort of be nice to Putin atmosphere among many European leaders, and particularly by Macron right now. So I think it's natural that he would go.
Well, Dickey, it's so hard to be hard on Putin, since it's difficult to be nice to Trump, right?
Well, I think that's right, and we know that Trump doesn't really care about football or soccer one way or the other. So, this is a good opportunity for Europeans to get together, or at least for Macron to get together with Putin before the Trump summit. And frankly, people here in Ukraine certainly, but in Europe generally, are very worried about that summit, particularly what might happen when Trump and Putin get together with nobody else in the room.
Something to think about, and something else to think about. Hey, what if, and it's a possibility, if Russia defeat Croatia and England get by Sweden, we could see a Russia-England semi-final. In the current context, what would you think of that prospect?
Next week, that could happen, really. I mean, Russia may win, England may win tomorrow.
Right.
So they will have to be in the same game. And it's going to make it difficult for the British to follow this, because, there is a boycott from...
for officials. We won't see Theresa May, that is for sure.
Yeah, but you won't see the royal family either.
Yeah.
You won't see any official statement. No, because there's a real boycott because of the poisoning
Let's talk about that poisoning.
Okay.
The second case of Novichok poisoning near Salisbury, England. Back in March, it was former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Now, the search is on for the element that contaminated an area couple in their 40s, no ties to the intelligence community. They're in critical condition. Witnesses describe them as behaving out of the ordinary when they attended a church hog roast last Saturday.
Where we feel violated. It seems that something awful has happened in a friendly community, and that we feel that somebody's taken advantage of us, and we really feel hurt by all that has gone on.
Elena Gabrielon, what are your thoughts on the second case?
Of course, it is the second case of poisoning, but blaming directly Russia and saying that Russia targeted another British citizens, I think it is not so evident, because if we are looking on the timing, we are on the eve of NATO summit, 1 week before the meeting, Donald Trump and Putin, and even in the context where Russia has a relatively bad image linked to this organization of World Cup. So I think that Russia, it is really not so obvious that has the interest to poison two
It doesn't seem useful
citizens.
for Putin. Putin is really having a fantastic time with his World Cup. It's a huge success. And you don't see why he would damage his success with the World Cup with a kind of...
But Annette, we saw back in March when there was the first instance, it galvanized public opinion behind Vladimir Putin in Russia itself.
Yeah,
but today I don't... Well, he does not
It seems
seem
less plausible today.
To need it. I mean, the World Cup has been so successful. No incident, no violence, everybody's happy. It's a huge success for Putin today.
I mean, I agree with Annette. You'd have to, construct a very complicated conspiracy theory to make this work to the advantage of Putin. And I agree with you. First case, it was different, but this time, and given the geographic proximity of the two cases, I think this is just bad luck that, this popped up again. And I think it will rather work to the disadvantage of the Russians, who, as Annette just mentioned, bake in the sun of this international event.
But you were
Christopher Dickey, you agree?
Well, I think it's even more complicated than that. There was an interesting article that just came out in Novaya Gazeta, probably Elena saw it, which suggests that back in the 90s, late 90s or early 2000s, criminal groups were able to obtain a few vials of Novichok poison, the poison that we're talking about here. And that raises the question of whether there are other actors who may have been able to poison either the Skripals or these people. I tend to agree that this was an accident. This was probably some sloppy murderer or attempted murderer leaving some of the traces of this poison around that this couple ran into. How exactly, we don't know yet. But I don't see any reason that they would have been targeted or targeted now specifically.
I mean, when the British Minister of the Interior, I think, what's his name?
Sajid Javid,
he came out and said, kind of used the thing to say that, Great Britain is not the poisoning ground. I mean, bullshit.
Let's listen to the political reactions. Yes, we can't jump to conclusions yet, but the Home Secretary saying he wants answers from Moscow.
It is now time that the Russian state comes forward and explains exactly what has gone on.
We call on Theresa May's government to stop the intrigue and games with chemical poison agents. I am convinced that one day the government of Theresa May will offer its apologies to Russia and to the international community for what they have done.
Stefan Siemens?
Well, I wouldn't be so sure about the apologies, but I think that this is a long shot the Home Secretary is taking there. And I think he does it because he's playing to the local audience, under the Brexit. He's using this probably to divert attention and, gain a few points for himself. It doesn't really make sense. And I agree to the theory Dickey put forward from Kiev. He said, this is probably an accident. This is just a bad chance.
It is an accident. It means, for example, if it is the same substance that was used for attacking in Salisbury, it means the the operation of cleaning up is questioned because until now, British special policy told that this cleaning up operation was perfect and there were no risk.
Yeah.
Now we see that there is a risk, and even public opinion in Great Britain could question if they are protected really
But Elena,
by their
they'd
own
rather question
authorities.
their own government than put the finger and the blame on Moscow.
Yeah.
No, but even if it's a leftover from the other operation, it's still scary. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
you walk around in a
Sure, I
shopping
mean-
mall. That's still
I
a
think
threat.
what the Home Secretary was saying was basically, we'd like to know why Russia brought this poison into Great Britain. Not necessarily why these two people were exposed to it, but why was one of the most potent chemical weapons ever developed being used to try to murder people in Great Britain? I think that is a legitimate question, and I do suspect that's the way he was trying to frame it.
So will Theresa May be conveying that question, those grievances about Vladimir Putin to Donald Trump when the pair meet first at the NATO summit, then in the UK, where, by the way, they're already preparing for the US president's visit? On Thursday, London Mayor Sadiq Khan gave permission for the flying of a blimp portraying Trump as a snarling baby to be flown over Parliament. Lena, are you looking forward to Trump's visit to Europe next week?
Yes, I think that it will be a huge event, especially 1 week before his meeting with Vladimir Putin, because there are a lot of issues. And I think that this NATO summit is one of the toughest in the history of this organization, because we have really a lot of crucial issues like migration, like also policy towards Russia, the reason of existence of NATO. So a lot of questions. And we know that the policy and the position of Donald Trump is really very particular about the future of NATO organization.
Is he going to blow up the NATO summit, Christopher Dickey, the way he stole the limelight by picking fights with everyone at the G7?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think basically he is the enemy of Europe and the enemy of the Atlantic Alliance. I don't think that's going too far.
The enemy of the Atlantic Alliance?
I think so. I don't think he likes the Atlantic Alliance at all. He doesn't like anything that makes a combined Europe that he has to deal with. He likes to deal with countries bilaterally, not multilaterally. And NATO, he's already expressed the idea that maybe NATO's passé. He's bruited the possibility that maybe the United States should pull out. He constantly talks about how the other countries are not paying their fair share of NATO dues, which is nuts because they do pay their NATO dues. He seems to think that the requirement or the attempted requirement to have countries pay a portion of their GDP, a higher portion of their GDP, is the same as paying dues at Mar-a-Lago. It's not. It's a question of how big your GDP is and how much you want to spend on defense. The United States spends a huge amount on defense because it has a huge economy. But in any case, all these arguments are about trying to break up basically a united Europe to the extent that he can. Why he wants to do that, I'm not sure. We do know that, of course, is a number one priority of Vladimir Putin, who he will be meeting one-on-one with nobody else in the room after he sees NATO.
Annette Lévy-Villard, your thoughts on that, and also that visit to Britain, because Britain is
in the middle of a negotiation.
In the middle of a negotiation, as we speak, Theresa May has her cabinet. She's confiscated the phones. They're at Chequers, the Prime Minister's residence.
But what you see coming from England is like you don't know where the Brexit is going to, when it's going to be, and how it's going to happen. Maybe only in 2 years. I mean, it's a really big question mark. They're really in the middle of a negotiation, so Trump may come in and say, okay, let's move on. Let's make a new alliance.
All right, well, speaking of Britain, did we hear right? Austria's Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, who since the 1st of this month holds the rotating presidency of the European Union, suggesting Thursday that if there's no border deal for Ireland, that Brexit talks could be extended. Your thoughts on on Sebastian Kurz's first days as rotating president of the European Council.
Well, it's an
Stefan
irony
Siemens.
of history that a right-leaning premier, and I'm very, very cautious at this point about nominating like this, came into office just a day after the death of Simone Weil, the staunch pro-European lady.
The anniversary of the death.
The anniversary of her death. It doesn't augur too well. And latest developments in the unfighting question about migration has shown that Kurz wouldn't give in a millimeter. In that particular case, I think he was right in that the whole discussion in Germany about, sending back the migrants and stuff, that was all done because our Ministry of the Interior, Mr. Seehofer, has elections coming up.
Let's talk about that. Kurz's remarks coming Thursday when he hosted Germany's hardline Interior Minister Horst Seehofer of the Bavarian conservative CSU party, who, yes, as Stefan was saying, it has a tough electoral fight in October. Now, he had backed off earlier in the week his threat to quit Angela Merkel's government, this after a deal to establish transit centers. They're not calling them transit centers anymore, but something like that.
Anchor centers.
Anchor centers, there we go, at the border with Austria. Seehofer and his Austrian hosts, who also announced, by the way, it's going to be a busy week next week, a three-way meeting on Wednesday. Italy's interior minister will be there. It'll be interesting to hear just how the far-right leader, Matteo Salvini, takes the deal that's been worked out between the Austrians and the Germans.
We will not hold Austria responsible, not now nor in the future, for refugees over whom it has no jurisdiction, because that is the responsibility of Greece and Italy.
That's the responsibility of Greece and Italy. In other words, send everyone back to Greece and Italy.
Yeah, Greece and Spain too. See what Angela Merkel mentioned, that there was a deal, couple of deals as a matter of fact, to send them back to camps or centers to Spain and Greece. That was what she said yesterday, I think.
So how's that meeting going to go next week between those three hard right leaders?
Well, nobody's talking about sending them to Italy anymore.
Well, that's what we just heard there from Seehofer.
But not today.
But that's bullshit. I mean, let's face it. Europe is beyond the point of generosity. They want to see the migrants back where they come from. Put them in these anchor or transition or whatever centers might there be. You want to be out of your own country. So Germany said, put them back to Austria. The Austrians said, put them back to Greece and Italy. And on top of that, the Europeans are discussing why not keeping the people in Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, North Africa. Well, none of these countries has agreed to it. I mean, there's nobody. It's like pushing the problem away from you geographically as far as you can. And the crisis this week in Germany has just shown there's no way out of it.
No way out of it. And the person in the middle who's maneuvering with care is Angela Merkel, promising both at the same time compassion and closed borders.
How are we to act within Europe? Here we say that those who apply to us for asylum and protection cannot choose the country. I would add, however, that the countries of arrival must not be left alone either. That is why the issue of distribution is so relevant, and Germany has always shown its solidarity.
How do you interpret that, Elena Gebrilan?
Well, actually, 2 years ago, she was talking about the opening doors policy. Now we are talking about this closed doors. And finally, I think that these all debates in Germany are not about the refugee crisis. It is about more political crisis in Germany with these upcoming elections in Bavaria. And finally...
and the European elections coming out next year.
Also, and in this coalition, the SCU...
the Social Democrats, the Social Christian.
CSU decided finally to borrow this topic from Alternative for Germany, this issue, and try to consolidate its own conservative basis and making the policy on these refugee issues for upcoming elections. I think it's very short term.
And there was
as far as I heard, they are not talking about sending back the almost 1 million migrants who are already.
They're talking about they're talking about new arrivals.
The new arrivals, the numbers are incredibly small. I mean,
Yeah.
the issue is like
30,000
between the
first-
border between Austria
compared
and
compared to
Germany,
what we saw.
10 a day.
Christopher Dickey, let me ask you about this. You heard Stefan Siemens using colorful language there to say how it's an empty deal between Merkel and her hardline interior minister. So who played who this week?
Well, I think we have to come back to the question of what was just said. This was political. This is all a political game about borders that maybe should be shut, maybe not be shut. But the truth is, there are not lots of people coming across the borders now. The question is, what do you do with the million people who were let in 2015? And that's what people should be talking about. If people want to look toward the future in Europe and how Europe is going to develop in the years to come, they need to figure out how to integrate a million people who were let in then, not how to stop 30,000 people at the border now. And I think this is one of those ugly, specious political arguments about foreigners that we see in the United States as well as in Europe.
Because if we compare to the number of migrants which were coming in 2016 and 15, now we have for 80% less number of migrants. And the question is not the new arrivals. The question is how we deal with the consequences of because we don't have still the common asylum policy in Europe. And I have the impression that we are trying to focus the attention to something less important because we can deal with something which is more important, the consequences of this mass migration from 2015 and 16.
Yeah, I agree to that. The tragic thing is that Merkel's probably most humane action of the whole 13 years in power. You know, this when she was moved not by the physicist thinking she's usually sticking to, but just by the daughter of a Protestant pastor. She reacted in a humane way, and now it's haunting her, and that's been haunting her ever since. And it might overshadow. It's
haunted her, but she's won re-election to a fourth term. I've read so many articles this week how it's the beginning of the downfall of the center-right in Germany, how we're going to have a more polarized Europe and a more polarized Germany.
We already do. Yeah. We have 92 parliamentarians sitting in the Deutsche Bundestag from the right-wing AfD. And they didn't want because, the economy is turning sour. They didn't want because of European issues like the euro. No, this is a one-issue party now. It's a migration, the fear of the foreigner. And the problem is that this week's, dealing with this issue has shown to the average European that Europeans just are not able to deal with it. I think it will just further the disenchantment with traditional politics.
Hey, on this point, Annette Lévy-Villard, France's highest court, the Constitutional Council, ruling against a law which had given a 4-month suspended sentence to an olive grove farmer for helping hundreds of migrants who'd crossed over from Italy.
It's a very old law which hadn't been cancelled since the end of the war. I mean, it's still there. I mean, all the socialist governments and all the other governments didn't want to cancel this law, which is that you can go to jail if you have migrants. But to go back to the question, like you see, Italy with 700,000 migrants already on its soil, 1 million or more or less in Germany, and you see they already have this population of migrants. And as you said, the political question is what to do now. Because the issue of the border for these countries is not the issue. But France didn't take that many people. It's around 10,000.
You get a point. We, Germany, need immigration. We always have been a country of immigration. My ancestor came in from Poland as migrant workers to work in the coal mines. So, I mean, it's just that you have to make, since it's a massive influx, you have to make a massive investment. And Germany has a budget surplus of 36 billion. So, I mean, why not take some of that money and just make a huge investment to education, housing, social care, and profit from this energy of young and willing people?
It was a 9.5-hour documentary about the Holocaust that featured no archived pictures, no narrator's voice. Claude Lanzmann's Shoah changed documentary filmmaking. This is the front page of newspaper Libération Friday after Lanzmann's death at the age of 92. In the obituary that you wrote, Annette de Vivillard, you describe, well, the ultimate engaged intellectual, as we call it here, in the vein of Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir, Lanzmann's lover at one time, and who wrote of the movie Shoah back in 1985, quote, "For the first time, we're living it in our heads, in our hearts, in our flesh."
10.000 Leute zum Behandeln, zum Liquidieren.
Herr Lanzmann, das ist zu hoch gegriffen. Glauben Sie mir das?
Wie viel?
12.000 bis 15.000. Aber da wurde auch die halbe Nacht dazu genommen.
An incredible feat when you think about it, that film.
That was the idea of Lanzmann, to have people reenact, to live again what they did during the war. Not to tell the story, but to be on the spot and to be in a situation to live. I don't know the word exactly because it's very complicated. He didn't want to be a historian. He wanted
people to embody what they'd experienced.
Exactly. That is what Simone de Beauvoir's quote you just mentioned is about, is that you are living the killing of the Jews. You are on the spot. It's different from telling a story. It's different from the archives. Lanzmann didn't use one piece of archive, none. But people talking and being back when it happened. And that's the incredible strength of this film.
And taking the time to tell the story. He joked when he got an award that it took him 11 years to make that movie,
12,
and the Nazi regime lasted for only 12.
Yeah, and he said too, the first time I interviewed him, he said 9 hours and a half. It's really, you suffer because it's about death and you're sitting in a chair for 9 hours and a half. You don't eat, you don't drink. And he said, yes, you have to suffer.
Yeah, it was 9 hours out of 300.
350 hours of Russian.
Of raw material. And
Yeah.
as Anand said,
Which was film in those days, so you...
yeah, you know, and the clip we just saw is like with a hidden camera. He got this SS man to talk about, you know, what he did. And that's the strength of this movie. It's all first hand. And that makes it a real statement, a real proof of what the people did and felt at the time.
And even I think that the fact that he could make it documentary, 100% documentary during 9 hours and a half, shows that he succeeded to resolve the problem, which is called post-Shoah art, like to show the scale. Because he was outspoken in his criticism against feature films, telling that we can't illustrate Shoah.
Yeah, he was very critical of Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List.
Right.
Because he was against fiction.
Yes,
He
because
said,
every fiction,
no fiction
is limited to one personal story in this huge catastrophe. And so of course, we imagine the scale, but is this something quite difficult? In this film, he really succeeded to show the scale of this catastrophe.
Do you agree with Claude Lanzmann, Christopher Dickey on that one, that you can't use fiction in this instance?
I don't think fiction can do justice to the horror of the Holocaust, of the Shoah. No, absolutely not. What's disturbing to me as we're thinking about this and talking about this now is the way we are seeing the rise again of neo-Nazis and of people who think like the people who carried out the Shoah. We had imagined that was all over in 1945. Now in 2018, we see signs of it all over Europe and in the United States.
But surely that was high in Claude Lanzmann's mind, that this was not a given, that something like this couldn't come back. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spent those 4 years in the editing room with all that footage as he made the movie.
I don't know. I mean, I can't see you all, but I'm sure that's exactly what he thought and was tremendously concerned about. But there's a problem. When you make something like this, it really is an intellectual exercise. A lot of people are not going to sit through 9 hours. Certainly a lot of neo-Nazis are not going to sit through it. And the question is, how do you act on the knowledge that something like the Shoah had happened, has happened and could happen again. And we don't see people acting on that right now.
But it's like a monument. It stays forever, even if you don't watch the 9 hours and a half and the other films. I have to mention that, he made a film about Sobibor to tell about the rebellion, the revolt, the fighting of Jews who knew they were going to die. And they said, okay, if we have to die, we may die fighting, like in Warsaw. That's a fantastic film.
It is.
So it's a whole global picture of what took place. It does not matter if you don't see everything. It stays forever. It's like a monument.
For a young audience, I think, movies like Spielberg's or Inglourious Bastards might work. But Spielberg is different because what he did is, as Annette said, it's a monument.
That was Quentin Tarantino, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a part of the proof. It's part of the mosaic that nails down history, and it cannot be washed away, even
Absolutely.
if the negationists of today. And I agree with Vicky's.
Exactly, it's against denial. You cannot deny it.
Try to revive the ghosts of the past.
Hey, just a word, because we're already running a little short on time. Just to say, Claude Lanzmann was much more than just the maker of this amazing movie. He was in the resistance at the age of 18. He was with the
he was a writer.
The liberation struggle in Algeria.
He supported
Israel.
He was on all fronts. He loved traveling. He loved women. He loved wars. He loved. He had this amount of energy.
Simone de Beauvoir was 17 years his elder. And in case you were asking,
that was very, very new.
Their relationship was anything but platonic.
J'avais un peu envie de voir qu'est-ce qu'il y avait derrière cette sorte d'impassibilité. Et c'est ça qui m'a amusé au début.
Et puis alors, tu as trouvé que j'étais moins impassible que je n'en avais l'air?
Ah, absolument.
It was very hot. It was, the letters.
It was a torrid affair.
Absolutely. I mean, when you read the letters.
And now we have a president who's got a spouse
24.
who's 24 years his elder.
Yeah.
But in those days, having a 17-year age gap was
very radical, because she thought she was 44. She thought she was an old woman, because 44 in those days you were already out of the picture. But she discovered with Lanzmann that she could be in love again, have a very physical relationship. And Lanzmann tells the whole story. I have to advise people to buy and read his biography.
The Hair of Patagonia.
Absolutely.
Which is a great book.
Relief de Patagonia. It's a great book because the guy was a writer too. Yeah. And he tells fantastic stories, including his love affair with Simone de Beauvoir, which is really very interesting and very progressive for these days.
Yeah, Lanzmann will go on as a witness to history and himself a monument to the same history he witnessed and he wrote about.
One final word on this, Christopher Dickey. He was, until his death, the editor of Gallimard's literary magazine, Les Temps Modernes, a magazine co-founded by the likes of Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus. It really is the end of an era.
Well, it is. I mean, when you rattle off the names of the people who were involved and think of what towering figures they were in the intellectual life of the 20th century, it's really hard to imagine how you could collect another set of names like that all working together at an institution like that today. And it's part of what made France great and makes it great, that it has that kind of heritage.
This is over. Today we have presidency who express their political convictions in 144 letters. It's called Twitter.
Okay. Before we go, the whole world is watching the weather forecast for northern Thailand. Earlier in the week, there was joy. 12 members of a youth soccer club and their coach located alive 4 kilometers from the entrance to the cave, where they'd gone for an excursion and were caught by rising monsoon season waters. And while foods and supplies have been brought in by divers, one of whom has perished while bringing oxygen tanks, the race is on to pump as much water as possible out before the rain comes again.
Previously, we thought the kids we found could live there for a long time. But now everything has changed. We have quite a limited time.
It's a gut-wrenching story.
Well, actually, it is, I think, one of the hardest operations, and a lot of experts are talking about that, because after this happiness, when these children were found, now we are living a very sober atmosphere on this site, and a lot of countries, 2,000, I think, volunteers are involved in this operation, and they face a dilemma. Either they are waiting that water is evacuated, or they learn to these children the diving skills, which could be really very, very hard, because the cave could have some narrow passes, and they
don't know how to swim.
Yes,
yeah,
and
the kids are between 6 and 13 years old. I mean, and they have to do a 4-hour dive. I mean, it's incredible.
Most of them can't swim.
And even if professional divers take the children one by one and try to go, for them it would be difficult if, for example, they are going against the storm, or if you have these narrow parts. So that is the...
So now they're trying to see if there couldn't be a way from the top to dig a tunnel or a hole. Yeah. It's 800 meters. I mean, they're underground. So it seems possible. When you think 800 meters, you believe that... you think about the tunnels in Gaza. You think that they could dig such a tunnel. But it seems to be very difficult for some technical reason that I don't understand. Well, so the water is coming back because the rain came back. So.
The climate and natural conditions are really very difficult in Thailand. You have many underground traps, so that's why maybe it is one of the risks why they don't want to dig to take the children.
And with the beginning of the monsoon season, what's been a human drama so far could turn out to be a human tragedy.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think that's exactly right. This is like watching a horrifying movie where you're hoping against hope that there'll be a happy ending, but we now have to face the possibility there won't be.
We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Christopher Dickey, for joining us from Kiev. I want to thank the rest of our panel, Elena Gabrielon, Annette Lévy-Villard, and Stefan Siemens. Stay with us. Our World Cup Daily is next.